All right. Trust everyone is doing well. I've been test piloting the next phase, moving into the big boost phase. The Pope is stepping down on the 28th of February, this next Thursday, and the world is going into a new phase right now, and we need to stay in sync with that and stay one step ahead. So I've been intensely test piloting the next phase. The next phase is affirmations. The truth is that with the way that things are going, will go in the future. If we do the affirmations, those who do the affirmations will be fine. In fact, they'll be better than fine. Those who don't will be in a lot of trouble, and probably in worse than a lot of trouble. It's strong medicine, but it has to be taken. So I've been taking the medicine and seeing how it is, and I love it. I love it. It's great. It's wonderful. It's not a problem at all. So what I'm doing here, on another channel, the Big Boost is here now. I'm starting to post shorter videos, 10, 15, some of them 20-minute videos, that are lessons on how to use affirmations. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to combine all the first six videos together, and post them here on Christ Clarity Reassurance, so all of you can get a feel for them. But it's better to go over to the other channel. The Big Boost is here now, and watch one video at a time and practice the video. Get used to it. Watch the first video, practice, and like take a day or two and practice it until you get it. Like, oh, this is easy. I can do this. It's like learning to play the piano. The first time I sat down at the piano, I hit the keys and did the stuff, and I realized, hey, I can play this C chord. I can do this. I can do this and this. Of course, I had played piano in a previous life, so it was easy. I had confidence. But it is like that. If you feel like, yeah, I can do this, then if you can do the basic affirmation, then you can then build upon it and get better and better and better at with practice. It's like learning to play the piano. It's not going to happen overnight. With practice. So the key to this time that we live in is practice. That is the key. With that practice of the right affirmations, you can literally just whole world parts like the Dead Sea, like it just will part for you, as it were. You will find that you'll be able to get free of it. So I'm going to this is just introducing these 6 videos that I've already done, and there's not much discussion. It is mostly just doing the affirmations. Over here on this channel is discussion. Now, discussion has a very useful place. Discussion prepares you for actually doing the affirmations. So it's very useful, but I don't want to mix the two together, because some people here, maybe they want to say, hey, I like the format here, and others say, you know what, I like the format here, but I want to succeed. I want to succeed. The discussion is useless if you don't move to the next step, which is affirmation. And we have a tremendous program of affirmation. When I say we, I mean the plan here in this world to help everyone. There is a way, there is a plan, and it does work. And we need to employ that plan to actually practice what we need to practice. So that's what the Big Boost is all about. The Global Challenge is all about. We have a Global Challenge 2013, 2016, meaning right use of time, right use of mind, which is practicing these affirmations. That's right use of time and right use of mind. And by doing that, we will find that we're just capable of easily dropping all the conflict, all the trouble. All of that is something easy to set down. Gently set it down. Easy. Not any problem at all. Piece of cake. Piece of cake. And yet for many, it won't be a piece of cake at all, because they feel that they need it. It's necessary. It's not necessary. Existence is not necessary. But the continuity problem means we will use hypotheticals to free ourselves from hypotheticals. That's what affirmations are. Using the right use of hypotheticals is another way to put it. All right. So I'm going to introduce these 6 videos. The first one is the first step. The second, they get progressively a little more complex. And this will give you a taste of the next phase, what I'm going to be involved in. I'll still be able to give clarifications, etc. It's not a problem. It's easy, but The best use of time is affirmations. Now, if you're going to use time, use it with affirmations instead of trying to clarify what all this confusion is really, where it come from, etc., etc. We should know that by now, and then we can just say, okay, it's all not, none of this is necessary. The ego cannot be taught anything. Cannot. Ego can't understand anything. In fact, there's no such thing as understanding, actually. Looking at things you can't understand. What does there understand? You can only see. Seeing, you see the one that's seen. What is seen doesn't need to be understood. The ego keeps thinking understanding can add up to seeing. It never does. You can't really teach the ego anything. Nothing that it really wants. It wants to learn how to kill spirit, kill God. That's what it wants to learn how to do. You can't teach the ego what is impossible. So it's useless to argue with the ego, discuss with the ego. It's a complete waste of time. It's better just to make affirmations of truth, affirmations of fact. So with that in mind, here is the first video, which gives the very root basic affirmation, three-part affirmation that is used throughout all the affirmations. They can be kept very simple and very basic. Just a three-part, like in music, you'd say three-part chord progression, 1, 4, 5. You know, it's like you can play just about every song in 1, 4, 5. You can play millions of songs with that basic chord progression, like C, F, G, so to speak. Same thing with the affirmations. Very simple, very easy, but practice them, get used to them so that you can do it. And then you'll be able to pick up on more sophisticated applications of them, and you'll become, at some point, you'll become very proficient. So the way I see it is, in this next phase of the global phase is affirmations. That is the next step. That is the next big thing. That is the big boost. So with that in mind, here is the beginning of the big boost. Enjoy and focus in, and when you go over to the other channel, the big boost is here now. Consider subscribing, because shorter videos will be coming up there. Very interesting videos that help you practice, encourage you to actually practice. That is what is necessary, encouragement to actually practice. So the big boost is here now. That's a user channel on YouTube, and I'll put in the description. I'll put a link down to that, and to link some of the videos, so you can get with it. So hopefully, as many of you as possible will realize time to shift gears and start in on this and get up to speed. And once you get up to speed, oh boy, you really can go. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. Once you learn how to ride it, you can ride that bicycle anywhere. Drive a car, same thing. You can drive that car anywhere once you learn how to drive it. Affirmations are like that. It's like learning how to drive a car. Once you learn, you're in. You've got it. Okay, very great. Here is the first video. Welcome to the Global Challenge 213, 216, next 4 years. Alright, so let's get started. I am Clarity Ross. The right use of time and the right use of mind actually is, and you need to go on a little bit of faith at this point until you test it out, is affirmations, right affirmations. The right type of affirmations. Okay, so we are going to actually begin doing that. And the simplest affirmation, the root affirmation, there's a root affirmation, and I've been test piloting this, okay, over the last few days, test piloting this basic affirmation to see how it flies, to see how it is, and no problems. It's great. It's absolutely wonderful. We start out with, I'm looking at a tree here, so I'm outside, so I'll say, this tree can't teach the ego anything. Okay, that's the first statement. This tree can't teach the ego anything. I'll break it down into parts first. This shrub cannot teach the ego anything. This pot cannot teach the ego anything. This table cannot teach the ego anything. This light cannot teach the ego anything. This sky cannot teach the ego anything. Those clouds cannot teach the ego anything. That's the first part of it, and you can practice this. Second part is, this tree doesn't need to be a tree. This sky doesn't need to be this sky. This light doesn't need to be this light. This post doesn't need to be this post. This table doesn't need to be this table. This couch doesn't need to be this couch. This person doesn't need to be this person. This computer doesn't need to be this computer. So the first part is this something can't teach the ego anything. This tree can't teach the ego anything. The second part, this tree doesn't need to be a tree. Okay, the third part is to say, instead of this tree, oneness is seen. Instead of this sky, oneness is seen. Instead of these clouds, oneness is seen. Instead of this light, oneness is seen. Instead of this computer, oneness is seen. Instead of this table, oneness is seen. So there's three parts. This basic affirmation, which will provide you with right use of time, right use of mind. Absolutely will. Three parts. First part, this tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be a tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. Okay, three parts again. So let's go over that again. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be a tree. Instead of a tree, oneness is seen. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. So this tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. So we're being very specific here. To start off with, we are very specific. Later on, in more expanded forms, we will be able to generalize, which is important. But to start out with, we have to be very specific here. So, wherever you are, wherever you're sitting, let's try that out. And you can choose something. Whatever it is, what are you looking at? Say this shelf, maybe you're in a room. This bookshelf. This bookshelf can't teach the ego anything. This bookshelf doesn't need to be this bookshelf. Instead of this bookshelf, oneness is seen. So try that out. Try that out. I'm going to, when I'm giving you the go-ahead to try it out for yourself, I'm going to turn on this light like that. Boom. Okay. Can be seen. Okay. And then I'll turn it off. Let me see how that will work. Oh, it's a little bright out here like that. Yeah. Okay. So, for a bookcase or whatever you're seeing, a window, maybe a window, this window can't teach the ego anything. This window doesn't need to be this window. Instead of this window, oneness can be seen. Oneness is seen. Let's go more direct. Instead of this window, oneness is seen. Oneness is seen, not can be. Can be puts it in time. So, rewind. This window can't teach the ego anything. This window doesn't need to be this window. Instead of this window, oneness is seen. So you're going to try that out right now. Okay. Now, let's try it again. This window can't teach the ego anything. This window doesn't need to be this window. Instead of this window, oneness is seen. Now we can shift it over to something else. This wall. This wall can't teach the ego anything. This wall doesn't need to be this wall. Instead of this wall, oneness is seen. One more time. This wall can't teach the ego anything. This wall doesn't need to be this wall. Instead of this wall, oneness is seen. All right, you're going to give that a try. Try the wall. Let's try the wall. One more time. All right. Over again. This wall can't teach the ego anything. This wall doesn't need to be this wall. Instead of this wall, oneness is seen. Let's try another one. This carpet, or this flooring, whatever flooring. This carpet can't teach the ego anything. This carpet doesn't need to be this carpet. Instead of this carpet, oneness is seen. This carpet can't teach the ego anything. This carpet doesn't need to be this carpet. Instead of this carpet, oneness is seen. So we'll give that a try right now. Okay. All right. This is the basic form, and this whatever can't teach the ego anything. This whatever isn't this whatever, or needn't be. There's no, this whatever doesn't need to be this whatever. Instead of this whatever, oneness is seen. Oneness is seen. That is the root affirmation. And from this root affirmation, we can put refinements and embellishments and expand its application, etc. But it's very important to start off with this basic form, this 1, 2, 3 basic form. You get this and you're on your way. You're literally on your way to which is to see. And see, what is seeing? See is sees oneness. Looking sees things. Seeing sees oneness. So when we say that oneness is, instead of this thing, oneness is seen. Instead of this tree, which we're looking at, and we're looking at as a thing, instead of this thing, oneness is seen. Okay. So, to expand it, here's a little expansion. You can try it. We'll try it. In the next video, we'll introduce more and more expansions of this to show you how it works. But here's just a pre-taste of the next video. This day cannot teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. Try that again. This day can't teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. One more time. This day cannot teach the ego anything. And this day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. Okay, so there's an example. So in the next video, we will I will show you how to expand the affirmations. Okay, but let us review the affirmation one more time. Remember, it has three parts. Part 1, this, and then you refer to something, are those, that cat can't teach the ego anything. That cat doesn't need to be a cat. Instead of that cat, oneness is seen. Okay, that cat can't teach the ego anything. That cat doesn't need to be that cat. Instead of that cat, oneness is seen. Instead of that cat, oneness is seen. All right. That's the basic format. So, this is a beginning, global challenge, right use of time, right use of mind. This is actually how it's done. This is the highest use of the mind that we can employ right here in hypothetical land, which is actually the situation that we are engaging with. It's the highest way, it's the right way, and it will enable us to get what we really want, which is to see oneness. Instead of this, I see oneness. We can say I can see oneness, but it's better to say I see oneness. That takes it out of time, you see. Okay, and we'll get into that in further videos. There's more to come, and it gets better and better and better. But first of all, there needs to be this practice of the basic format. 1, 2, 3. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be a tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. All right. Very great. We've made a great start here. And that's it for this one. See you in the next one. Welcome once again to the Global Challenge 2013-2016. Next 4 years, we're going to learn to use our minds and our time in the best possible way. I'm Clarity Ross, and I'm helping facilitate this Global Challenge. Part of the Big Boost, Big Global Boost. This is the Big Boost. We're using affirmations, and this is the second video. The first video went over the basic root affirmation, which is 3 parts. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. Okay, now we're going to expand on that a little bit to show you how you can expand it. As you're doing these affirmations, naturally you'll say, hey, maybe I can expand it a little bit. So of course, absolutely. So let's start out with a tree. Since I'm in this outdoor studio, I'm looking at this tree. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This is the basic one. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. Okay, instead of this tree, oneness is seen. All right, now we're going to expand it. And we're going to say, these trees can't teach the ego anything. These trees don't need to be these trees. Instead of these trees, oneness is seen. All right? This cloud, we start out, this cloud can't teach the ego anything. And this cloud doesn't need to be this cloud. Instead of this cloud, oneness is seen. Okay? Now let's expand it. Those clouds can't teach the ego anything. Those clouds don't need to be those clouds. Instead of those clouds, oneness is seen. Okay, again, those clouds can't teach the ego anything. Those clouds don't need to be those clouds. Instead of those clouds, oneness is seen. Again, we start out, that person can't teach the ego anything. That person doesn't need to be that person. Instead of that person, oneness is seen. Now we'll expand it. Those people can't teach the ego anything. Those people don't need to be those people. Instead of those people, oneness is seen. All right? Those people can't teach the ego anything. Those people don't need to be those people. Instead of those people, oneness is seen. So this is the basic expansion. You go from a singular to plural. For instance, that hill can't teach ego anything. That hill doesn't need to be that hill. Instead of that hill, oneness is seen. Then you go, those hills can't teach the ego anything. Those hills don't need to be those hills. Instead of those hills, oneness is seen. That mountain can't teach the ego anything. That mountain doesn't need to be that mountain. Instead of that mountain, oneness is seen. Those mountains can't teach the ego anything. Those mountains don't need to be those mountains. Instead of those mountains, oneness is seen. Okay, so you are going to try that out now. And first, you're going to select something. Select something, maybe a book. Maybe you're in a room with some books. We'll start out with the singular one. I'll go through it first. That book can't teach the ego anything. That book doesn't need to be that book. Instead of that book, oneness is seen. Then, those books can't teach the ego anything. Those books don't need to be those books. Instead of those books, oneness is seen. Okay, so you're going to try that out. I'm going to click the old light here, and you're going to start out with that book. Start out with the singular. Okay, that book. Okay, let's go on to the plural. Those books. Boom. All right. Very good. To go over them again. That book can't teach the ego anything. That book doesn't need to be that book. Instead of that book, oneness can be seen. Plural. Those books can't teach the ego anything. Those books don't need to be those books. Instead of those books, oneness is seen. All right, we will try something else. Maybe you have, what do you have in a room? Maybe some plants. Maybe you have some plants in your room. Start singular. Start off with a singular. That plant can't teach the ego anything. That plant doesn't need to be that plant. Instead of that plant, oneness is seen. And plural, those plants can't teach the ego anything. Those plants don't need to be those plants. Instead of those plants, oneness is seen. So give that a try. Give that a try. Start out. I'll do the 1, 2, 3 for the 3 parts of it. So first we're starting singular. The first part. That plant. Okay, go. Okay, go to the plural. Those plants. All right. That plant can't teach the ego anything. That plant doesn't need to be that plant. Instead of that plant, oneness is seen. Instead of that plant, oneness is seen. Those plants can't teach the ego anything. Those plants don't need to be those plants. Instead of those plants, oneness is seen. All right, plural. Now, here's something very interesting. We can get into time with this, okay? So we're going to expand this. We've been using like things that we're used to think in terms of thinking of things. Plant, tree, book, whatever. The next video we'll get into expanding it to things that we feel are more abstract. For instance, time, okay? This hour can't teach the ego anything. This hour doesn't need to be this hour. Instead of this hour, oneness is seen. This hour cannot teach the ego anything. Instead of this hour doesn't need to be this hour. Instead of this hour, oneness is seen. This hour can't teach the ego anything. This hour cannot teach the ego anything. This hour doesn't need to be this hour. Instead of this hour, oneness is seen. This day can't teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. Okay, so that'll be the next video I'll do for you. And let us go back over the one we just did. The first video started out with a singular. In this video, affirmation, we introduced the plural. And you can play with that. That is fun as you go along. You say, this car can't teach, as you're driving, this car can't teach the ego anything, you say. This car doesn't need to be a car. Instead of this car, oneness is seen. Instead of this car, oneness is seen. And then you say, those cars can't teach the ego anything. Those cars don't need to be those cars. Instead of those cars, oneness is seen. As you're driving, doing your commute, or going anywhere, you see telephone poles. You can try it. Those telephone poles can't teach the ego anything. Those telephone poles don't need to be telephone poles. Instead of those telephone poles, oneness is seen. Houses, wherever you're driving, you see the plural, don't you? Easily see the plural. Those cars, those roads, those stoplights, those buildings, those people. You can do singular and plural. Whatever you like. You see, as you get rolling on this, you can see a crowd and that person, and go, those people, those people. All right. Next video, we will get into more seemingly abstract use of these affirmations. But very great Let's track this one more time. The plural. Those people can't teach the ego anything. Those people don't need to be those people. Instead of those people, oneness is seen. All right, very great. See you in the next one. All right. Welcome to the Global Challenge 213, 216, the next 4 years. Right use of time, right use of mind. I'm Clarity Ross, helping facilitate the right use of time, right use of mind, which is actually to use a very, very profound use of affirmations. And this is the third video. We started out, the first one introduced a very basic root affirmation. The second one helped expand it into using plurality with your affirmations. And this third one is going to introduce more abstract use of it. So the first one, to recapitulate, said this tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. The second video said these trees can't teach the ego anything. These trees don't need to be these trees. Instead of these trees, oneness is seen. Now we're going to introduce something slightly more abstract. This day can't teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. And now we're going to expand that. This month, this week, let's try it. This week can't teach the ego anything. This week doesn't need to be this week. Instead of this week, oneness is seen. This month can't teach the ego anything. This month doesn't need to be this month. Instead of this month, oneness is seen. This year can't teach the ego anything. This year doesn't need to be this year. Instead of this year, oneness is seen. This decade can't teach the ego anything. This decade doesn't need to be this decade. Instead of this decade, oneness is seen. This century cannot teach the ego anything. This century doesn't need to be this century. Instead of this century, oneness is seen. This millennium cannot teach the ego anything. This millennium doesn't need to be this millennium. Instead of this millennium, oneness is seen. Okay, let's practice that. You see how we're expanding the affirmation here. Expanding. So this is a wonderful feeling like, hey, there's a lot of power to this, isn't there? There really is. So let's start off with this minute. Let's try that, and we'll just run through the expansion. Just go along here. This minute can't teach the ego anything. This minute doesn't need to be this minute. Instead of this minute, oneness is seen. This hour can't teach the ego anything. This hour doesn't need to be this hour. Instead of this hour, oneness is seen. This day can't teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. This week can't teach the ego anything. This week doesn't need to be this week. Instead of this week, oneness is seen. This month can't teach the ego anything. This month doesn't need to be this month. Instead of this month, oneness is seen. This year can't teach the ego anything. This year doesn't need to be this year. Instead of this year, oneness is seen. This decade can't teach the ego anything. This decade doesn't need to be this decade. Instead of this decade, oneness is seen. This century can't teach the ego anything. Instead of this century doesn't need to be this century. Instead of this century, oneness is seen. This millennium can't teach the ego anything. This millennium doesn't need to be this millennium. Instead of this millennium, oneness is seen. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to try this on your own. I'll start it out, and then you I'll call out I'll call out like minute, and then you do the minute. Then I'll call out the hour, and you do the hour. Okay. So I'm gonna turn the light on here. You're gonna do this, and I'll call out the minute. Okay. This minute. this hour, this day, this week, this month, this year, this decade, this century, this millennium, all right. So let's go over it one more time. Just go over it with me here. We'll start out with this second. This second can't teach the ego anything. This second doesn't need to be the second. Instead of the second, oneness is seen. This minute can't teach the ego anything. This minute doesn't need to be this minute. Instead of this minute, oneness is seen. This hour can't teach the ego anything. This hour doesn't need to be this hour. Instead of this hour, oneness is seen. This day can't teach the ego anything. This day doesn't need to be this day. Instead of this day, oneness is seen. This week can't teach the ego anything. This week doesn't need to be this week. Instead of this week, oneness is seen. This month can't teach the ego anything. This month doesn't need to be this month. Instead of this month, oneness is seen. This year can't teach the ego anything. This year doesn't need to be this year. Instead of this year, oneness is seen. This decade can't teach the ego anything. This decade doesn't need to be this decade. Instead of this decade, oneness is seen. This century can't teach the ego anything. This century doesn't need to be this century. Instead of this century, oneness is seen. This millennia cannot teach the ego anything. This millennia does not need to be this millennia. Instead of this millennia, oneness can be seen. All right. So that you see how you can climb the ladder into generalization. We can do it with people. Let's try it with people now. Let's start practicing with different stuff. This person cannot teach the ego anything. This person doesn't need to be this person. Instead of this person, oneness is seen. That couple cannot teach the ego anything. That couple doesn't need to be that couple. Instead of that couple, oneness is seen. That group can't teach the ego anything. That group doesn't need to be that group. Instead of that group, oneness is seen. That bunch can't teach the ego anything. Instead of that bunch doesn't need to be that bunch. Instead of that bunch, oneness is seen. That crowd can't teach the ego anything. That crowd doesn't need to be that crowd. Instead of that crowd, oneness is seen. That population can't teach the ego anything. That population doesn't need to be that population. Instead of that population, oneness can be seen. All the people in the world can't teach the ego anything. All the people in the world don't need to be all the people in the world. Instead of all the people in the world, oneness can be seen. So there you go. That's an example. The tree, this tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness can be seen. Oneness is seen. Oneness is seen. Those trees can't teach the ego anything. Those trees don't need to be those trees. Instead of those trees, oneness is seen. Is seen. That grove of trees can't teach the ego anything. That grove of trees doesn't need to be that grove of trees. Instead of that grove of trees, oneness is seen. That hillside of trees can't teach the ego anything. That hillside of trees doesn't need to be that hillside of trees. Instead of that hillside of trees, oneness is seen. That forest can't teach the ego anything. That forest of trees, let's say, that forest of trees can't teach the ego anything. That forest of trees doesn't need to be that forest of trees. Instead of that forest of trees, oneness is seen. The trees of this planet cannot teach the ego anything. The trees of this planet don't need to be the trees of this planet. Instead of the trees of this planet, oneness is seen. And then you can say, the trees in the universe can't teach, all the trees in the universe can't teach the ego anything. All the trees in the universe don't need to be all the trees in the universe. Instead of all the trees in the universe, oneness is seen. Okay. So in this video, we've used both climbing the ladder, expanding it, climbing the ladder, and more abstract. Let's see if we can get something more abstract. A little more abstract, yes. Something that near and dear to us. Okay. Something abstract would be like sickness. This sickness can't teach the ego anything. Or this cancer can't teach the ego anything. This cancer doesn't need to be this cancer. Instead of this cancer, oneness is seen. And then you can climb the ladder on that. These cancers can't teach the ego anything. These cancers don't need to be these cancers. Instead of these cancers, oneness is seen. And you can go from specific, this cancer, to those cancers, and all cancers, then say, all cancers can't teach the ego anything. All cancers don't need to be all cancers. Instead of all cancers, oneness is seen. And then you can go to another specific. For instance, diabetes. Diabetes can't teach the ego anything. Diabetes doesn't need to be diabetes. Instead of diabetes, oneness is seen. Or you can say that diabetes. Then you go, that diabetes, or my diabetes, that diabetes. Start out with that specific. Start with specific. That diabetes doesn't need to be that can't teach the ego anything. That diabetes doesn't need to be that diabetes. Instead of that diabetes, oneness seen. Then those diabetes, the diabetes in this area, or in this hospital, diabetes in this hospital can't teach the ego anything. The diabetes in this hospital doesn't need to be diabetes in this hospital. Instead of all the diabetes in this hospital, oneness is seen. Then you can expand it. All the diabetes on this planet can't teach the ego anything. All the cases of diabetes on this planet can't teach the ego anything. All the cases of diabetes on this planet don't need to be all the cases of diabetes on this planet. Instead of all the cases of diabetes on this planet, oneness is seen. Okay, so we're getting into more advanced use of affirmation, and you can get the taste of what's going on here. You say, hey, wait a minute, wow. This is pretty profound, isn't it? It is. It is very profound. It's like a piano. There's certain notes, and you can play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And so simple notes, and then you can hit simple chords, and then you can get more and more, start playing more and more beautiful music on the piano. So something more abstract, again, anger. My anger cannot teach the ego anything. My anger doesn't need to be my anger. Instead of my anger, oneness is seen. Our anger can't teach the ego anything. Our anger doesn't need to be our anger. Instead of our anger, oneness is seen. A group of people, or some protesters, a group of protesters. This anger can't teach the ego anything. This anger doesn't need to be this anger. Instead of this anger, oneness is seen. A war. Okay, let's expand it from a protest movement to a revolution. A revolution. All this anger can't teach the ego anything. All this anger doesn't need to be all this anger. Instead of all this anger, oneness is seen. And then to the most abstract, we'll just use the term anger in this abstract way. Not anyone in particular, just anger. We'll say, anger can't teach the ego anything. Anger doesn't need to be anger. Instead of anger, oneness is seen. Let's try that again. So we went from specific to the abstract, completely abstract, right, which covers all forms of anger. Start out with the specific. My anger, our anger, this anger, that anger, this large anger, and then just anger. So let's try one more. Anger again, the abstract. Anger cannot teach the ego anything. Anger doesn't need to be anger. Instead of anger, oneness is seen. All right, that's abstract. Now let's do another abstraction. Remember, we did the time, this hour, this day, that kind of thing. How about, here's an abstraction on that. But we start at second, hour, second, minute, hour, day, week, month, year, decade, century, millennium, okay? So at the end we say this millennium can't teach the ego anything. This millennium need not be this millennium. Instead of this millennium, oneness is seen. Now let's go to the abstract. Time cannot teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. Okay? See, this is the big one, isn't it? You can feel that. It's like shifting gears, like wow. It's a new ballgame. I can really say that, of course. To work up, go from the second to the minute, to the hour, to the day, to the week, to the month, to the year, to the decade, to the century, to the millennium, and then finally finish it off saying, time can't teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. Okay, so now you're there. You say you're feeling like, hey, I can arrive. I can arrive. Absolutely, I can arrive. But it's very important to practice the specifics and the basics and the specifics first before we get to the absolute statements. Okay, in the next video we'll practice more absolute statements. All right, okay, very great. See you in the next video. Welcome to the Global Challenge 213, 216, next 4 years. Right use of time, right use of mind. I'm Clarity Ross. I'm going to be helping this along. What we're doing is we're using right affirmations. Very powerful. It's the right use of time, right use of mind, the right thing at the right time. In the previous videos, first video we started out with just a basic singular affirmation. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be a tree. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. The second video we made plural. Those trees can't teach the ego anything. Those trees don't need to be those trees. Instead of those trees, oneness is seen. Third video, we began climbing the ladder, or expanding. This second, this minute, this hour, this day, this second can't teach the ego anything. And then we went on to this minute can't teach the ego anything. This hour can't teach the ego anything. This day can't teach the ego anything. This month week can't teach the ego anything. This month can't teach the ego anything. This year can't teach the ego anything. This decade can't teach the ego anything. This century can't teach the ego anything. This millennia can't teach the ego anything. And then the final step, which was introduced in the third video, was time can't teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. It takes it up to the abstract level, which is total generalization, right? It covers everything, all time. It covers all of time. So in this fourth video, we're going to practice this more abstract form of affirmations, which carry the tremendous clout to them. Tremendous. In video 3, we also dealt with like specific forms of sickness, and then went up to saying sickness can't teach the ego anything, right? So we will practice that here. Let's start off with sickness. Sickness can't teach the ego anything. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. All right, let's do that again. Sickness can't teach the ego anything. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. All right? Now, one more time, along with me. Sickness can't teach the ego anything. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. So now you're going to try that. And I'll put up the 3 parts, always 3 parts to this. So 1, and then 2, and then 3. Or maybe it's going to be seen up here better. 1, 2, 3. When I put up the 1, that's the first part. Sickness can't teach the ego anything. So first time I'll go along, I'll say it, then you repeat after me. So, okay, I will say, okay, sickness can't teach the ego anything. So you go. Okay, my turn. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Your turn. Okay, my turn. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. So your turn. Okay, one more time. My turn is sickness can't teach the ego anything. My turn. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. All right, now you're going to do it on your own right now. And I'll just hold up the 1, 2, 3. Go with sickness. Okay, go. One more time with sickness. And together. Sickness can't teach the ego anything. Sickness doesn't need to be sickness. Instead of sickness, oneness is seen. All right. Very good. Very good. 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 Let us try the time. Let's do time, and we'll do it. The same way. When the light is on, that's your turn. Okay. I'll just like last time. I'll start off. I'll say it once, and then you repeat. Okay. So the first one is time can't teach the ego anything. Hold on. Let me turn this on. Okay. Time can't teach the ego anything. Go. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. Okay, let's do that again. Time can't teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. All right. Very great. We'll do it together here. Time can't teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. All right. Let's see if we can come up with another abstraction. Space. There's a big abstraction. Okay. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. All right, one more time. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Okay, let's try this abstraction here. Let's see, that goes. Okay, all right. Again, same format. Space can't teach the ego anything. Go. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. One more time. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Okay, now you're going to do it on your own, and I will just hold up the fingers, starting with space. Go. One more time. Space. All right. And together, we will do that. Space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Now, that's the abstract form of space. Now, of course, we need to practice the more specifics also to lead up to that. So, this space right here, this space can't teach the ego anything. Where you're sitting, this space can't teach the ego anything. Bring it back to the personal now for a while. This space can't teach the ego anything. This space doesn't need to be this space. You could say the space in this room where you're at. The space in this room can't teach the ego anything. The space in this room doesn't need to be the space in this room. Instead of the space in this room, oneness is seen. The space in this house can't teach the ego anything. The space in this house doesn't need to be the space in this house. Instead of the space in this house, oneness is seen. The space in this yard can't teach the ego anything. The space in this yard doesn't need to be the space in this yard. Instead of the space in this yard, oneness is seen. The space on this street can't teach the ego anything. The space on this street doesn't need to be the space on this street. Instead of the space on this street, oneness is seen. Okay, you're driving. The space in this car can't teach the ego anything. The space in this car doesn't need to be the space in this car. Instead of the space in this car, oneness is seen. The space on this road can't teach the ego anything. Instead of this, the space in this road doesn't need to be the space on this road. Instead of the space on this road, oneness is seen. And then you look out further and you go, the space, you can say this, the space that I am seeing, the space out there that I'm seeing can't teach the ego anything. The space out there that I'm seeing doesn't need to be the space out there that I'm seeing. Instead of the space out there that I'm seeing, oneness is seen. And then you can say, the space that everybody is seeing can't teach the ego anything. The space that everybody's seeing doesn't need to be the space that everybody's seeing. Instead of the space that everyone is seeing, oneness is seen. And then go to the abstract, which is space can't teach the ego anything. Space doesn't need to be space. Instead of space, oneness is seen. Okay, so we've bumped up the practice now to using an abstract like space in specifics. Okay, the space in this car, space on this road, the space out there that I'm seeing, the space that everybody's seeing, and then to the complete abstract, which is space. So we combined formats here. We're getting more advanced. We combined the specific with an abstract. Instead of this tree, we say this space. The space between me and this tree. In other words, that's specific. We could say the space between me and this tree can't teach the ego anything. So, or the space in this car, some defined space, and then you define it a larger area. The space in this park. Okay, that's a larger area. You might say the space where I'm sitting. Let's say we're sitting in a park. The space where I'm sitting here can't teach the ego anything. And then the space over to that playground from me to that playground can't teach the ego anything. Then the space in this park can't teach the ego anything. Then the space in this city, or the space in this state, the space in this country, the space in this planet or you can use the space that the people are seeing, the space that those people are seeing, space that I'm seeing, the space that those people are seeing, the space that everyone is seeing. And then work your way up to the abstract. Okay, ultimately, we use specifics until you feel really comfortable with them, and then expand your specifics until you feel really comfortable with them, and then expand them some more until you feel very comfortable, and then try climbing the ladder. Climb the ladder and see if you can get up to that total abstraction of just space. Space can't teach the ego anything. Time can't teach the ego anything. Right? People can't teach the ego anything. Planets cannot teach the ego anything. The universe cannot teach the ego anything. You can climb the ladder there. In the next video, how's this one going? Yeah. In the next video, we will try climbing the ladder with larger and larger situations. So, okay. Very, very great. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome to Global Challenge. The Global Challenge 213-216, next 4 years, right use of time, right use of mind. I am Clarity Ross, helping facilitate this. We are using affirmations. The highest use of mind here is to use affirmations, the right type of affirmations. And I believe this is what, the 5th video. We've gotten up to a point now where we're really rolling, and we're going to show you how to apply these affirmations in a way that's just going to say, wow, this is really amazing. The basic form, to go over again, is starting out with just one thing. This tree can't teach the ego anything. This tree doesn't need to be this tree. Instead of this tree, oneness is seen. And then plural, those trees can't teach the ego anything. Those trees don't need to be those trees. Instead of those trees, oneness is seen. Then we moved up to much wider This forest can't teach the ego anything. This forest doesn't need to be this forest. Instead of this forest, oneness is seen. Then we did the abstract. Vegetation, let's say. Vegetation can't teach the ego anything. So this jumps from a specific form of vegetation, which is trees. We go one tree, two trees, many trees, and then we shift gears into the abstract vegetation. Okay, so vegetation can't teach the ego anything. Vegetation doesn't need to be vegetation. Instead of vegetation, oneness is seen. Okay. That is climbing the ladder and then jumping, shifting gears to the abstract, where we're not specifying a specific form of something. For instance, we use time, and we climb the ladder all the way up to saying, time can't teach the ego anything. Time doesn't need to be time. Instead of time, oneness is seen. Now, we're going to apply this. Let's apply it to ourselves specifically. Let's say, I can't teach the ego anything. Okay, I cannot teach the ego anything. We'll start with that. I can't teach the ego anything. I don't need to be I. Instead of I, oneness can be seen. Or we can say this, where I am, let's try that spatially. Where I am right now, the place that I'm at right now, let's see, this room that I'm at, this room, let's say you're sitting in a room, we're probably sitting in a room. Let's try that first. So, but you're in the room, so you're saying, okay, this room, you realize you're in this room. This room that I'm in, let's say that this room that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This room that I'm in doesn't need to be this room that I'm in. Instead of this room that I'm in, oneness can be seen. Now you can say, this house that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This house that I'm in doesn't need to be this house that I'm in. Instead of this house that I'm in, oneness is seen. This street that I'm on can't teach the ego anything. The street that I'm on doesn't need to be the street that I'm on. Instead of the street that I'm on, oneness is seen. This city that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This city that I'm in doesn't need to be the city that I'm in. Instead of this city that I'm in, oneness is seen. This county that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This county that I'm in doesn't need to be this county that I'm in. Instead of this county that I'm in, oneness is seen. This state that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This state that I'm in doesn't need to be the state that I'm in. Instead of the state that I'm in, oneness is seen. This country that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This country that I'm in doesn't need to be this country that I'm in. Instead of this country that I'm in, oneness is seen. This continent that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This continent that I'm in doesn't need to be this continent that I'm in. Instead of this continent that I'm in, oneness is seen. This hemisphere that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This hemisphere that I'm in doesn't need to be this hemisphere that I'm in. Instead of this hemisphere that I'm in, oneness is seen. This planet that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This planet that I'm in doesn't need to be this planet that I'm in. Instead of this planet that I'm in, oneness is seen. This solar system that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This solar system that I'm in doesn't need to be the solar system that I'm in. Instead of the solar system that I'm in, oneness is seen. This galaxy that I'm in cannot teach the ego anything. This galaxy that I'm in doesn't need to be this galaxy that I'm in. Instead of this galaxy that I'm in, oneness is seen. This universe that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This universe that I'm in doesn't need to be this universe that I'm in. Instead of this universe that I'm in, oneness is seen. Okay, that's climbing the ladder on a grand scale, you see. So we're going to practice this. This is it's personal and it's also abstract at the same time, right? So it's very potent. I mean, I'm feeling the potency of this as I do it. It's wow. So it's very potent. So we're going to give this a try. Again, the format is, first I will make the statement, and then you repeat the statement, the affirmation. First part, second part, third part. And then we'll climb the ladder together. And then we'll go back, and when I make the first statement, I hold up a finger. I say, well, this way. Okay, it's better, easier seen. The first part is this room that I'm in. That's the first part. Can't teach ego anything. This room that I'm in. Second part, doesn't need to be this room that I'm in. Third part, instead of this room that I'm in, oneness can be seen. So 1, 2, 3. I'll hold up my fingers. It indicates what part of the affirmation we're at. We'll try to keep the affirmations 3 parts. 1, 2, 3. When the light goes on, it's your time to make your affirmation, and when it's off, that's when I'm going to make my affirmation. So we'll start out we're in a room, okay, and we'll start out. I'll say it, then you repeat. So my turn. So 1. This room that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. Your turn. This room that I'm in doesn't need to be this room that I'm in. Instead of this room that I'm in, oneness is seen. Okay. Now, the next. This house that I'm in can't teach ego anything. This house that I'm in doesn't need to be this house that I'm in. Instead of this house that I'm in, oneness is seen. Okay. This street that I'm in, this city that I'm in, let's do that. This city that I'm in can't teach ego anything. This city that I'm in doesn't need to be this city that I'm in. Instead of this city that I'm in, oneness can be seen. Is seen. Oneness is seen. Okay. This county that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This county that I'm in doesn't need to be this county that I'm in. Instead of this county that I'm in, oneness is seen. This state that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. The state that I'm in doesn't need to be this state that I'm in. Instead of the state that I'm in, oneness is seen. This country that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This country that I'm in doesn't need to be this country that I'm in. Instead of this country that I'm in, oneness is seen. This continent that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This continent that I'm in doesn't need to be this continent that I'm in. Instead of this continent that I'm in, oneness is seen. This hemisphere that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This hemisphere that I'm in doesn't need to be this hemisphere that I'm in. Instead of this hemisphere that I'm in, oneness is seen. Okay? This planet that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This planet that I'm in doesn't need to be this planet that I'm in. Instead of this planet that I'm in, oneness is seen. This solar system that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This solar system that I'm in doesn't need to be the solar system that I'm in. Instead of the solar system that I'm in, oneness is seen. This galaxy that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This galaxy that I'm in doesn't need to be this galaxy that I'm in. Instead of this galaxy that I'm in, oneness is seen. This universe that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This universe that I'm in doesn't need to be this universe that I'm in. Instead of this universe that I'm in, oneness is seen. All right, very great. I won't make you do that all on your own yet. All right, that's enough, because that's a profound one. That is a profound one. We can do it. Let's do it together. Let's do it together. To cool down, let's do it together. This room that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This room that I'm in doesn't need to be this room that I'm in. This room, instead of this room that I'm in, oneness is seen. This house that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This house that I'm in doesn't need to be this house that I'm in. Instead of this house that I'm in, oneness is seen. This city that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This city that I'm in doesn't need to be this city that I'm in. Instead of the city that I'm in, oneness is seen. This county that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This county that I'm in doesn't need to be this county that I'm in. Instead of this county that I'm in, oneness is seen. This state that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This state that I'm in doesn't need to be the state that I'm in. Instead of the state that I'm in, oneness can be seen. Oneness is seen. This country that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This country that I'm in doesn't need to be this country that I'm in. Instead of this country that I'm in, oneness is seen. This continent that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This continent that I'm in doesn't need to be this continent I'm in. Instead of this continent that I'm in, oneness is seen. This hemisphere that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This hemisphere that I'm in doesn't need to be this hemisphere that I'm in. Instead of this hemisphere that I'm in, oneness is seen. This planet that I'm in doesn't need to be this planet. This planet that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This planet that I'm in doesn't need to be this planet that I'm in. Instead of this planet that I'm in, oneness is seen. This solar system that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This solar system that I'm in doesn't need to be this solar system that I'm in. Instead of this solar system that I'm in, oneness is seen. This galaxy that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. Instead of this galaxy that I'm in doesn't need to be this galaxy that I'm in. Instead of this galaxy that I'm in, oneness is seen. This universe that I'm in can't teach the ego anything. This universe that I'm in doesn't need to be this universe that I'm in. Instead of this universe that I'm in, oneness is seen. Okay, so that's powerful. And we'll leave it at that. And we'll see you in the next video. All right, here we are again. Global Challenge 213, 216, 4 years of right use of time, right use of mind. I'm Clarity Ross, helping facilitate this. And we are moving forward very rapidly now with right use of time, right use of mind, using the right affirmations. And we've started out very simply with video 1 and going through expanding upon it as we go. In this video, we are going to get into another usage of affirmations which we haven't touched on yet, which has to do with thoughts. Okay. So, how do we do this? Daydreaming. Let's say we're daydreaming. We'll say, this daydreaming can't teach the ego anything. This daydreaming doesn't need to be this straight daydreaming. Instead of this daydreaming, oneness is seen. And we can be specific. Let's be specific. This daydreaming about, let's see. This daydreaming about going on a vacation can't teach the ego anything. This daydreaming about going on a vacation doesn't need to be daydreaming about going on a vacation. Instead of this daydreaming about going on vacation, oneness is seen. So you can use this format when you start to daydream. Identify something in the daydream. Maybe you're daydreaming, let's say, about dinner tonight. Say, this daydreaming about dinner tonight can't teach the ego anything. This daydreaming about dinner tonight doesn't need to be daydreaming about dinner tonight. Instead of this daydreaming about dinner tonight, oneness is seen. Okay. We can be daydreaming about the past. Okay. Reverie about the past. this reverie about the past. This reverie about past friendships can't teach the ego anything. This reverie about past friendships doesn't need to be this reverie about past friendships. Instead of this reverie about past friendships, oneness is seen. So if your thoughts are going forward and you're daydreaming about the future or some situation, identify something in there. And you can even break down the parts of it. Like if you're daydreaming about going on vacation and you're thinking about a new car and driving somewhere, say, this daydream about a new car can't teach the ego anything. This daydream about a new car doesn't need to be a daydream about a new car. Instead of this daydream about a new car, oneness is seen. And then you're daydreaming about taking this new car, driving to some place, maybe a new house. This daydream about a new house can't teach the ego anything. This daydream about a new house doesn't need to be a daydream about a new house. Instead of this daydream about a new house, oneness is seen. This new place, you're going to a new place. This daydream about moving to a new place can't teach the ego anything. This daydream about moving to a new place doesn't need to be a daydream about moving to a new place. Instead of this daydream of moving to a new place, oneness is seen. So during the daytime, your thoughts will wander. Your thoughts will wander. You'll have let's say your thoughts will turn to some song. You're like, you say, this song can't teach the ego anything. Okay, this is like an internal song. Let's say you think humming along, like, oh, it's a catchy song. This song can't teach the ego anything. This song doesn't need to be this song. Instead of this song, oneness is seen. My thoughts about this song can't teach the ego anything. My humming this song can't teach the ego anything. My humming of the song doesn't need to be my humming of the song. Instead of my humming of the song, oneness is seen. You're listening to a song. My listening to this song on the radio, let's say listening to the radio, okay? My listening to this song on the radio can't teach the ego anything. My listening to the song on the radio doesn't need to be my listening to the song on the radio. Instead of my listening to the song on the radio, oneness is seen. Again, my listening to the song on the radio can't teach the ego anything. And my listening to the song on the radio doesn't need to be my listening to the song on the radio. Instead of my listening to the song on the radio, oneness is seen. So this is something that we often do. It involves something a little more abstract than like seeing a tree. You're listening to a song, and the song you're singing, maybe you're having thoughts about the song, you're feeling something, right? So it's like a more of a complete experience that we're used to having. So let's say you're driving along in your car and you're listening to the song on the radio, and you're having thoughts about the song, and you might be triggering daydreams, etc. And there's this whole constellation, right, of mental activity going on. So we will practice this sort of, this more thought-based, internalized content. We'll practice, before we've been using more externalized content and getting more personal. Now we're going into the interior of our thoughts and reactions, etc. Combining it with something external, like a song. Okay, so this is very good practice. We'll start out with just the song. This song can't teach the ego anything. This song doesn't need to be this song. Instead of this song, oneness is seen. Then we say, my listening to this song can't teach the ego anything. Instead of my listening to this song doesn't need to be my listening to this song. Instead of my listening to this song, oneness is seen. Then we can say, my feeling that I have listening to this song can't teach the ego anything. My feeling that I have listening to this song doesn't need to be my feeling that I have listening to this song. Instead of my feeling that I have listening to this song, oneness is seen. My reverie that I have listening to this song can't teach the ego anything. My reverie that I have listening to this song doesn't need to be my reverie that I have listening to this song. Instead of my reverie that I have listening to this song, oneness is seen. So, then we can say song in the abstract. Let's keep going. Song, music can't teach the ego anything. Let's say music can't teach the ego anything. Instead of music doesn't need to be music. Instead of music, oneness is seen. Then we'll say another part is feeling, your reaction to it. Feeling, let's say listening. Okay, listening can't teach the ego. Listening to a song, let's keep it abstract. Listening can't teach the ego anything. Listening doesn't need to be listening. Instead of listening, oneness is seen. Now let's go to feeling, another component of this constellation of experience. Feeling can't teach the ego anything. Feeling doesn't need to be feeling. Instead of feeling, oneness is seen. Okay, so what we're doing is we're taking a constellation of an experience, components. There's the music, there's the listening to the music, and there's the feeling that you have the music. And now we'll use thoughts, reverie, or daydreaming. Let's use reverie. Reverie can't teach the ego anything. Reverie doesn't need to be reverie. Instead of reverie, oneness is seen. So we have the song, the listening, the feelings, the reverie. Okay? Those are multi-components of an experience, and how we use affirmations for that. It's a very powerful way, because as we go about in the world, of course, we're having all these experiences, and we need to be able to use the affirmations on the experiences. So one of them is you're driving in a car. Because one thing most of us do is we hear music. We hear songs, okay? And we like listening to music. Like, tapping our feet and feeling something. And then we kind of triggering some thoughts. Like, I'd like to buy this or get something. And very, very important to practice with music. So we will practice this now. First of all, we'll do the specific, and then we'll go split the components up into the abstract. Okay, so there's two parts to this. There's a more advanced form of affirmation. The basic three parts, but 3 parts now being used on 2 different levels. One is the more specific, personal one, and then the other is the abstract, general one. So one starts out the song, the listening, I'm listening, I'm feeling, and I'm having reverie. Those things, okay? And the other is simply music in general, listening in general, feeling in general, and thinking in general. Okay, let's run it through here. Let's run it through. Smooth it out. Smooth it out. This song can't teach the ego anything. This song doesn't need to be this song. This song, let me start again. Instead of this song, oneness is seen. So this song this song can't teach the ego anything. This song isn't this song. Instead of this song, oneness is seen. Then say, my listening to this song can't teach the ego anything. My listening to the song doesn't need to be my listening to the song. My listening to this, instead of my listening to the song, oneness is seen. Then my feeling of listening to this song can't teach the ego anything. My feeling of listening to this song doesn't need to be my feeling of listening to this song. Instead of my listening to the song, oneness is seen. And then my reverie off of the feeling of listening to the song can't teach the ego anything. My reverie off of the feeling of listening to the song doesn't need to be my reverie off of the feeling of listening to the song. Instead of my reverie on the feeling of listening to the song, oneness is seen. Okay. And that is the specific aspects, and we will practice this because it's a little more complex. So we'll go slowly. We'll go slowly, but it's important to build up facility with this, so that we can begin to apply it with the experiencing that we're having and catch ourselves immediately and say, I can use an affirmation right there. I'm listening to a song. Here's a song, I'm listening to it, I got this feeling, I got this reverie, and I'm being lost in the reverie, and suddenly you say, whoa, wait a minute, boom. And you can catch it right away, and pull yourself back into affirmation. So, again, the basic format is, I will hold up the fingers, first part and then the second part and the third part to the basic affirmation. And when I turn the light on, that's your turn to repeat it. Okay, so start out. This song can't teach you anything. Your turn. This song doesn't need to be this song. Instead of this song, oneness is seen. All right, so now we're going to go on to my listening to the song can't teach the ego anything. My listening to this song doesn't need to be my listening to this song. Instead of my listening to the song, oneness is seen. Okay. My feeling of listening to the song can't teach the ego anything. My feeling of listening to the song doesn't need to be my feeling of listening to the song. Instead of my feeling of listening to the song, oneness is seen. Okay. My reverie on the feeling of listening to the song can't teach the ego anything. My reverie on the feeling of listening to the song doesn't need to be my reverie on the feeling of listening to the song. Instead of my reverie on the feeling of listening to the song, oneness is seen. All right, very great. Not easy, but very doable, as you see. It's very doable. That's why practice is necessary. Practice will get you up to speed pretty darn quickly, very quickly. Now, there's a second component to this, which we will do. In that complex of experiencing song, listening, feeling, thinking, we have 4 components, right? We have the music, we have the listening, we have feeling, and we have thinking. So now we're going to use those affirmations of those in the abstract. Okay, so it would be like this. Music can't teach the ego anything. Music doesn't need to be music. Instead of music, oneness is seen. Listening can't teach the ego anything. Listening doesn't need to be listening. Instead of listening, oneness is seen. Feeling can't teach the ego anything. Feeling doesn't need to be feeling. Instead of feeling, oneness is seen. Thinking can't teach the ego anything. Thinking doesn't need to be thinking. Instead of thinking, oneness is seen. All right. This is a little easier because it's abstract. So we will, first I'll say it one time with you and you'll repeat, and then you're going to then do this on your own. It's pretty easy. This one's pretty easy. Okay, so I'm going to go, music can't teach the ego anything. Your turn. Music doesn't need to be music. Instead of music, oneness is seen. Listening can't teach the ego anything. Listening doesn't need to be listening. Instead of listening, oneness is seen. Feeling can't teach the ego anything. Feeling doesn't need to be feeling. Instead of feeling, oneness is seen. Thinking can't teach the ego anything. Thinking doesn't need to be thinking. Instead of thinking, oneness is seen. All right, now we're going to go back over it, and I'll introduce the abstract topic, and you're going to do the affirmations. So we're going to start off, first part, with music. And it starts off as, music can't teach the ego anything. Okay, so we're going to do the first part, go, music. Second part. Next one is listening. Go. Next one is feeling. Next one is thinking. Let's do it one more time. It's pretty simple. Let's start off with music. Listening. Feeling. Thinking. There you go. All right. Very great. Very powerful. To go back over what we did, we're getting into very useful advanced forms of affirmation here, actually, that we can utilize as we're going about our day, because we're not always sitting here in contemplation like this, in a quiet room, quiet place, focused, right? We're driving, we're talking, we're interacting, we're working, we're doing stuff, and it gets difficult at that time. That's what I've experienced, is there are certain routines that it gets difficult for us, like eating food is one, working is another. Driving is easy. Driving is a really, really great time to practice. Super great time, actually. But there are situations that arise, and our mind will start going off on tangents, and we'll start listening to music, we'll hear a song, we're shopping and stuff, and we need to be able to apply affirmations in those situations. So going forward, I will begin to introduce specific situations and the affirmations that can be used in those specific situations. But what we did here was we identified a constellation, a rapid constellation of listening to a song. We're driving a car, or we're listening to music in our room or on our computer, and we're feeling something, and we've got some reverie going. Okay, that's 4 parts, isn't it? 4 basic parts. The song itself, the listening to the song, the feeling that we're getting from listening to the song, and the reverie that starts to kind of bubble up from the feeling that we get from listening to the song. Those are 4 parts that happen boom, 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 boom. And suddenly we're caught in this constellation. And so we need to identify the constellation and realize, hey, I have an affirmation that can deal with that easily. No problem. And then after we make those affirmations and pull our mind back to affirmations, then we can go to the abstract, which is more powerful. It's very powerful. And we say, music can't teach the ego anything. Listening cannot teach the ego anything. Feeling can't teach the ego anything. And thinking can't teach the ego anything. And then we've taken ourselves out of this jail cell of constellation of music, listening, feeling, thinking. Suddenly liberated ourselves from it. And we feel like on top of the world, say, hey, wait a minute. I'm not trapped by any of this. I am not trapped by any of this. Right? And then you can start flying on more and more generalizations. This planet can't teach the ego anything. This planet can't teach the ego anything. Right? And you can work yourself up, and then you suddenly say, this galaxy, this solar system, this galaxy, this universe can't teach the ego anything. All-inclusive. This universe can't teach the ego anything. This universe doesn't need to be this universe. Instead of this universe, oneness is seen. And then you feel very, very, very liberated. And it's very profound. But how do you get there? We have to identify where we're at right now and catch ourselves where we're at right now. That's why we need to be very specific. We have to be very skilled in start out specific on specifics. So I believe this is enough for this first series of videos, where we've gotten from the very simple to the very complex, as it were, to identifying constellations that we're dealing with. Instead of, we may see a tree, and we're looking at the tree. Okay, this is the thing. The tree, we're looking at the tree, we're getting a feeling of looking at the tree, and then we're having thoughts based on the looking and the feeling of that tree. That's sort of the basic constellation, right, of where we're at. We're moving, and there's movement, and we're experiencing the movement, and we're having a feeling from that movement, and we're having thoughts based on the feeling of the movement. Say in a vehicle, a car, we're moving along. We're eating food. There's the food, there's the tasting of the food, there's the feeling that we get from the tasting of the food, and there's the thoughts that we have around the food, the tasting, and the feeling. There's basic constellations of experience. So, drinking, touching something. There's a thing. We're touching the thing. Like there's water. Let's say there's water and we're in a pool. There's water. We're splashing the water. We're having fun splashing the water. We're feeling the splash of the water. We're looking at the splash. We're getting a sensation from the water and splashing the water, and then we're getting thoughts based on that sensation or that feeling. So again, in that instance, we would say, this water can't teach the ego anything, and this splashing this action, this splashing can't teach the ego anything. This feeling of splashing the water can't teach the ego anything, and the thoughts that I'm having on the feeling of splashing this water can't teach the ego anything. You see, so what we're going to do is get adept at breaking down these experiencing and making affirmations for each part of it, and then abstracting it. And abstracting it in that situation would be, water can't teach the ego anything. Feeling can't teach, touching can't teach the ego anything, or sensation can't teach the ego anything, or action. Let's put it this way: water can't teach the ego anything, action can't teach the ego anything, sensation can't teach the ego anything, and thoughts can't teach the ego anything. Okay, so in every situation that we're in, we can break it down that way, break it down in some pretty simple way, actually, and then abstract it, break it down, specifics of what's going on with us, then abstract it to include all such instances. Okay, and that gives an enormous feeling of liberation. And that is the power of affirmations. They may seem very simple, basic, but you can use them in these very generalized ways, and you can use them in any situation that we're in. So, okay, this is enough for this series at this point, unless I make another one. I don't know if I will or not, but maybe something will come to mind. But we will have a series of, I'll put myself in situations, or narrate it or something, or maybe put myself there, I don't know, possible, and show how to break these situations down. I haven't tested this part out yet. I might have to test pilot this a little bit to see how it's done, but these videos that I've just done, this first series, is enough for you to work on. It really is. It's really enough for you to work on, and just do the first videos. Go back and do the first videos. I know you've probably already done them, but if you hear this video and you haven't, go back and do those first. But review. Get up to speed, because eventually we'll be able to start practicing breaking down the situations that we're in, and identifying very quickly what we're going through, and then making the right affirmations for that, and then expanding it and generalizing it, and then abstracting it totally. So we can say this song, or then these types of songs, like listening to a country song, rock song, whatever, that's easy, listen, pop song. Let's say a pop song, listen to a pop song, jazz, folk music, whatever. Listening to jazz. Okay, we're listening to this jazz song. Easy jazz, easy listening jazz. This song, and then this genre. This easy listening jazz can't teach the ego anything. And then this modern music can't teach the ego anything. And then music can't teach the ego anything. You can climb the ladder there. Okay, you can go that way. You can climb the ladder in each specific. Also, so it does get more involved as we go along, and that's why practice of the basics is very important. So, all right, very great. We've made an enormous big boost, a big jump into the global challenge. The global challenge is to actually do this. That is the challenge. So I'm actually doing this, you see, taking up the challenge. And each one of us doing it, we're giving an enormous boost to the planet, an enormous boost to everyone, to the universe. An enormous boost, because we're saying this universe can't teach the ego anything, which is a statement of fact. It's a statement of fact. Because what the ego is trying to learn is how to separate us from reality. And that can never be learned. It can never happen. But that is all that it's trying to learn. And so how can the impossible be taught? It cannot. So we say this universe cannot teach the ego anything. That is a statement of fact. And since it can't teach the ego anything, it doesn't need to be a thing. The universe doesn't need to be a universe. This universe doesn't need to be this universe. Means it doesn't need to be looked at as a thing, as a universe. Okay? The last part of the affirmations is, instead of this universe, meaning instead of looking at this universe as a thing, as a universe, oneness is seen. Oneness is seen. So instead of this universe, looking at this universe, oneness is seen. Just oneness. The oneness. That is. It's not this, it's not that, it's not that. It's just the oneness that is. It's seen. Okay. So that is the reasoning behind these affirmations. Is first we recognize that we can't teach the ego anything. This universe can't teach the ego anything, which is very true. It cannot. Nothing can teach no thing can teach the ego anything. But this universe can't teach the ego anything. Therefore, this universe doesn't need to be this universe. It doesn't need to be looked at as a thing. Therefore, instead of looking at it as a thing, we can switch over to seeing oneness. Oneness is seen. It's not we're the ones seeing it. It's being seen. So there's no seer. It's being seen. Okay. It's not I am seeing it, because I am a thing. Thingness doesn't see. Seeing sees. The oneness sees the oneness. Okay. So there you have the reasoning behind all of this. And so this is a great start. A great start. A great start. And a great start means great results, doesn't it? Once begun, half done. Okay. Appreciate the viewership, and just practice, and we'll see you in the next video.